Eventually, the goal is to get to just selling your productized service and then just saying completely no to everything. And that's when you really start to see progress. But you feel like you're losing out on a ton of money and opportunity as well. So there's a mental kind of game.
Welcome to the Jolly and Sorcery Knowledge Series, made for smart business leaders who want to stay ahead of the competition using proven strategies. Each session, Jolly and Sorcery chat with an authority in a specific digital niche. From SEO to PR and beyond, these leaders reveal the tactics and mindsets that changed their game and could change yours. Without further ado, here's your host, Greg Heilers.
All right, Tyler, thank you so much for taking the time. You have helped us immensely over the past year. It was actually a year ago, almost to the day, I'd say maybe 50 weeks ago, you interviewed us at Jolly, thinking about where we were at then, where we think we might go, issues we were working through. And I, at the time, was just overcoming this, if I could be honest with you, like repulsion I had to the whole productize concept, because I thought what we were doing was so special that it couldn't be systematized and put into processes. And well, we 5x'd last year. And there were some downsides, which I'd love your insights on. But but what I'd really love to talk about today is, let you introduce yourself first for a second, and talk about your experience productizing services, and think about what's kind of stopping some founders from doing that. What are the positives, the negatives, and then, what's next for the people like us who are slowly emerging from the operator role. So Tyler, thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate it. I mean, credit to you and your partner Morgan as well, as far as just implementing and taking action. And yeah, it was cool to see. Literally, I mean, it was crazy. Yeah, about a year ago, just the progress you've been able to make by systematizing, dialing in some things on your side, which has allowed you guys to scale quite a bit. And that's really kind of the essence and of what I try to help people with, service businesses specifically on the productizing side.
Maybe you would advocate against this, but it's really even beyond any defined goal we had, is what the results were for us. We didn't, in the interview we did a year ago, I was like, I think, and I'm conservative by nature, I think maybe by end of year we'll hit 50K MRR. And by end of year we hit 100K MRR, and we're definitely on track to hit more than that. So I think it's really fascinating what the ramifications could be if you go down this path.
Yeah, and to give you kind of the audience just a little kind of back story, I guess, on myself.
Yes,
Been
please.
kind of the service businesses for a while, typically offline, then went online, and really just from there, just because family was in service businesses, whether it was with property management, client facing stuff, that's just kind of what I've always felt comfortable with, and maybe had shaped the skill sets that I learned. And I just transitioned that into the online space, instead of going down maybe a SaaS or an e-commerce or product based company. And yeah, after a while, just hit my head against the wall a lot and realized, just scaling services has a lot of issues, and experienced those firsthand. And then really with one of the previous businesses, a couple of businesses ago, in the content writing space, that's when I really started to hone in the productizing kind of element after reading books like Built to Sell for the third time and understanding, cool, like to actually get myself out of the business, have this business scale without me, I'm going to need to productize and systematize the way I do things within the business. And that was kind of the catalyst, building that business. And then after that, built another business and sold that one. And then that's about when we met. And I realized, cool, like fairly good at this. And I enjoy working with people, and launched kind of productized.services, which essentially is kind of where I do interviews. I interview different service business owners, have a weekly kind of newsletter, and then do some mentoring, which we were able to fortunately meet through that program, and just helping people with exactly that. How can you actually productize your service business? And my whole kind of philosophy is, turning what you do into a scalable process so you can turn 6-figure years into 6-figure months is kind of the idea.
I mean, that sums it up, our experience, right? Like even one of our early calls, we didn't have a single flow chart until you just were like, all right, well, guys, let's just think about this for a second. All the way down to, like you said, the content you are putting out has been really insightful for me. Certainly, I haven't watched every episode, but I think I've
Come
watched
on, man.
5. I'm sorry. It's on my list. I've got like 7 more to go. But I've watched a good handful, and they're really good. Business owners working through like problems, and you guys talking about the upsides and the downsides. I guess for starters, I shared my personal obstacle, one of them, to even getting started on this. What are
Yeah.
some reasons that founders, or let's call it a small business owner, wouldn't take this leap of faith, or take the first steps into action? Maybe mental, but maybe just downright like they can't figure out how to get systems going. I'm not sure. You've probably seen tons of pain points around this issue.
Yeah, so just mainly around like founders creating systems and actually starting to kind of productize, like what are some of the hurdles there?
Yeah, I think you said it right. I guess I'm imagining for us and people in your mentorship that I was watching.
Yeah.
You have a community aspect to your program, and it's been interesting to see them go through the similar discussions. Like, for example, one I know of is a lot of the time, and we've talked about this, is it's just thinking that you are the one that can execute
Yeah.
it. Like, you are the one. But there's others, and I know there are. And I'm thinking, like, what in your experience, like, what are the obstacles that are actually quite easy to overcome if you're willing to approach them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book called, and you may have read this one, The E-Myth,
You told me to
by
read it.
Michael Gerber, and he talks about this entrepreneurial kind of myth where it's the creative that is really good at, like he uses like a baker, like they're really good at baking, but then they're like, cool, I'm going to start a bakery, and then they've realized that it's not just about baking. There's all these other elements of business. So I think a lot of people too, it's like the first hurdle is like getting out of like the one-to-one creative aspect, right? Because a lot of people start businesses based on their specific creative skill set, whether you're a writer, a designer, you're whatever it may be, insert X service. Like you have a skill set. That's why you probably started the business. So it's really hard to have someone else do that, or in your mind have someone do it as good as you, and that prevents you from ever exiting or hiring someone to take over that specific role for you. So that's like, I mean, everyone's at different stages. Some people can move past that really quickly, and other people kind of get stuck in that kind of part of the process of removing yourself. They get stuck in that for a long time, or some people just never leave that at all. There's
Yeah.
also great examples of one person, consulting companies, or one person creative agencies like Design Joy, for example, who's fairly popular, and designjoy.co, I believe, is the website, and he does UX UI design. It's one guy, one designer, and he's been able to scale it. I think he just passed 30,000 MRR, and he might have a few people helping him, but I know that was one of the hurdles, and he admitted it in our interview that we did. It was just like for him to hire other people to take over that creative element was really hard, and he's only going to be able to scale that so far without eventually having to kind of tackle that kind of inner challenge. But and
Yeah,
then you
and
guys
like you
like Seth
said,
Godin.
oh,
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
I was just
Right.
gonna say, like one person consulting is like Seth Golden is like a single
Yes.
consultant that's been able to scale his time, and he's built something that's, I talk about this a lot, but you have what you call like valuable and sellable, right? And he might have a very most one person consulting companies have very, they might have a valuable business, but not a sellable business, because it's all dependent on them. So it also comes down to like, what do you want at the end of the day as well? But if you're trying to build something that can kind of run without you, that can kind of scale, then that's the first hurdle for sure in getting out of.
Yeah, I mean, I just was interrupting to say, and I agree with you. You know, there's nothing wrong with having a 20, 30K MRR business of one. Your expenses probably aren't that high. I mean, that's a great income for a lot of people who are professionals.
Yep.
Uh, the thing that you talked about, and you mentioned a book on this subject that also confused me initially was, you know, Morgan and I, we had just finally hit upon a successful business model, and all of a sudden language was coming in about building it to sell, and we were thinking, what? Like what? Like we just got a stable income. Like why would we get rid of this? And there was a lot of learning to do for us there that, and you said it to us over and over to help us understand it. I think was that you're building it not to sell, but you're building it so it's able to sell, because those kinds of companies are quite enjoyable to be an owner of, it turns out. And I've really enjoyed the upsides. I'm curious, like, you know, you had shared some info with us, and we don't have to dive into details here if you don't want to, but what are some of the transformations you've seen in terms of, like, obviously we all know the stereotype of the business owner who works 90-hour weeks, 100-hour weeks, even 70, 60, I've certainly done for periods of time. So we
Yeah.
could talk about time savings or stress load or even income increase. I'm not sure. Like what are some benefits, if you were to bullet point them, of productizing and thinking about your systems instead of just order fulfillment?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot. Well, I mean, you look at a typical service business or agency, and as these businesses scale, they're very chaotic, right? And
Yeah.
the agency owner, the CEO, whoever's actually in charge of taming the ship, is usually stressed out, not getting much sleep. They're not making much money. It's like it's not a healthy place to be. And that's, I think, the downside of trying to scale people, especially like creative people, creative services. Um, and that's the whole idea behind productizing is, you know, trying to fix that. And I think there's a lot of really cool kind of use cases where now it's, I'm more against like the anti-agency, building something that's not like very traditional, even though there's a lot of those out there. There's a lot of big agencies. But I think it's like, to your point, like designing something to exit, kind of being intentional with the way you want to build something. There's a lot of ways to build a service business. So by productizing your agency, you're able to actually um, kind of tame the beast as well. So, I mean, the upsides, I mean, you kind of alluded to, and there also are downsides, which I think are good to touch on as well.
I'd love to
Um,
next. I'm going to share one of ours, for example.
yeah, definitely. So I think when you start to productize and systematize what you're doing, and you're finally getting yourself out of operations, like you typically have a much more seamless sales process because you're selling something that's very straightforward, right? It's a product. There's no variance. There's very little to no variance. People know what they're getting right from the start, which makes it easier to sell and just creates a better customer experience. Um, just like buying, I always use the example of buying something off Amazon, right? You go there, you know exactly what you're getting, what's included, the price, when it's getting to your house, all the details, the reviews. And when you can package up your service offering in a similar way, it just adds a lot of confidence to the customer and then you as well. Also have a lot of streamlined operations because people are doing similar things over and over again. And every project that comes in that you sell isn't going to be completely new, right? You can also have better control over costs compared to doing like bespoke type of things. When you're selling a fixed thing, then you know exactly kind of what that's going to cost you over time as well. You usually get paid up front and faster. And you kind of remove kind of the growth ceiling, right? Because now you can duplicate yourself and you're not that one-to-one like Design Joy, for example. He's going to hit the ceiling where he just can't, there's no more hours in the day. And eventually he's going to have to start hiring people. But there's that growth ceiling, which a lot of people hit, right? And then as well, you're just making something that's a lot more valuable. because you're building kind of a machine that doesn't rely on you. So those are probably like some of the top ones that kind of come to mind.
Yeah, and that value piece, again, didn't resonate with me before I opened my eyes to, there's more value than the income Morgan and I are receiving each month in all the
Yeah.
work people talk about brand equity and things like that. So it really was a new window for me, even so far as today we're considering buying complementary services to increase the value of the company through leveraging the value of our current company, right? So it's really something to consider. You and I both agree that we should also talk about some of the downsides. I'd love to share, for us, there were two main that stick out to me that happened in the very recent past and are still working through. The first, we've, thank goodness, end of March 2021 resolved. This productized service, you mentioned Amazon, it almost felt like, yes, the sky is the limit. The growth ceiling is removed. And
Yeah.
we went through this period of 2 months of rapid sales and onboards, except we couldn't fulfill it. So it was Greg driving. I even shared it on LinkedIn. I doubled our investment in lead gen at the end of 2020 because everything was going swimmingly. Well, it worked. And then we got a lot of sales and we didn't have the fulfillment together. And so it created a bottleneck that was silly in hindsight, but it was very real. For 2 months, we burned some bridges with some who would have been great clients, things like that. It got ugly. The other side, I'm dismissing that because, we learned from it. We apologized to some people, but more importantly, long term, we set up the systems so that we don't do that to ourselves again. And we learned not to be so aggressive in a way until we're ready for it. I
Yeah.
think the other side is one I never expected, which is all of a sudden our really sexy, sellable, productized service somehow looks like a liability to me. And maybe it's because the niche we're in, but I'm curious if you've seen this weakness, and then I'll be quiet and let you think of some other downsides that I'm not thinking of. But it was like, wait, we're a single service entity, which was really, really, really good up until we realized we had no diversification going on. And so for 3 months now and ongoing, we're putting our energy into new service development. And we had been half-heartedly even prior, 6 months prior, but now we really got the fire under us to figure out how to diversify. Not because we're scared that our service is imploding, but just because it seems pragmatic at this point.
Yeah, well, I think you guys did a great job, I think, of scaling. I always try to there's a great book, Ready, Fire, Aim.
Yes.
And that one was great, but he talks a lot about, listen, like you're going to take one product and scale that to $1 million before you even think about launching another product. So
Interesting.
I think there's going to be an essence of like being a little like you're concentrated into one product. And as well, I think your industry is also maybe a little bit to do with that. But I think you guys, growth wise and like how you guys are thinking about it is I think a really good way, because a lot of people get into trouble by trying to launch too many products too early and then they dilute themselves. But now you guys are in a great spot to be able to either, like you said, buy some other revenue streams or launch new products. The same thing with like the Hoth, who's run by a buddy of mine, and they were on a very similar path. They had one core product and then now they have 15 products that they just keep testing and launching new things, which also just drives to your growth, right? Because now you're selling to the same customer base over and over again, new products that they want. But they did a good job as well. So I think that's smart. I think as well, to your first point, yeah, I think you have a little bit of it's not like scaling software or products, right? Like either if you're selling a product on Amazon, you might run out of stock. If you're selling software, there's just unlimited. It's all just you're duplicating the dashboard or whatever software you're selling. So there's no ceiling there. But with services, there technically isn't a ceiling once you start productizing. But I like to ask the question to a lot of my guests on my podcast is like, what if your business, whatever it's 3x or 10x in the next tomorrow morning, what would you do? And essentially the answer is all the same. It's, well, I wouldn't have the people to fulfill on the orders. So I think that's the lever that you really have to plan for. Especially like you said, you're investing in all this LinkedIn growth, and things are clicking, and you guys have a great productized offering. So people are, signing up. So it's you have to almost go heavy, really heavy into hiring on the fulfillment side, which is, I think that's a whole other skill in itself, that I think once you get really good at that, I mean, at one point, like I said, in my writing business, we had 130 writers, and we had a dedicated person. That's all they did was just
Yep.
hire and train writers.
Yep.
And, we just made sure like that was her only job, because my partner and I, we hated doing that.
Yeah.
That wasn't like, I was just like, I don't want to, and like, she was great. She was from Poland. She spoke 8 languages. She spoke English better than me. I was like,
Better
she was
than
just a
I,
rock
Tyler.
star.
Better than I.
Hey, there you go. Good example.
My wife is she's always asking me language questions, and I'm like, don't ask me to explain why. I think I got
yeah, exactly.
She's like, weren't you a professional writer for 5 years?
So I think, that's something to think about as well. It's like, cool, if you're investing in growth, and like we talked about this, it's like finding out kind of that ratio for whatever team member, whoever's executing the work to your how many customers can they serve? Like you can kind of figure out a ratio which can help you on the hiring side. Because if you start bringing on a ton of customers, then you know exactly kind of, you can try to stay ahead of the curve on the hiring side. But I think that
I
that's
love
one
that.
of the downsides for sure.
You said stay ahead of the curve. I actually learned a new phrase for me today in another interview that will go live later on. I was speaking with Brad Smith of Codeless and Usurp and now Wordable. He talks about in their writer team at Codeless, they have a buffer that they manage. So they're unlike, we are now at the point where it's like, wow, we need to always stay ahead. They are so far ahead that whenever that buffer shrinks below a certain point, they have warning signs going off. Like, we need to get much further ahead. I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah, because I mean, to bring someone on to, like, whether it's hiring, filtering, getting someone on board, then training them, like there's definitely a gap between when someone's hired and when they can actually be at capacity or doing their thing for you in a productive way. So that's definitely, I mean, it's kind of like the equivalent to inventory management with an e-commerce business, you know? Because you're selling inventory, you have like this lead time. If you're ordering products from China, you have, sometimes it could be a month and a half
before
by the time you pay them before it's in Amazon's warehouse, right? So like you have to be on top of that, because if you run out of product, you're not making any money.
Yep.
So I think the advantages with services, it's a little faster. You can typically find people depending on what your service is, but same type of thing.
No, it's true. New team members need time, especially for any business owner who prides themselves on quality of service, right? Quality of deliverable. You want them to be ready for your clients' expectations. That's in our mind. Morgan and I come from a food service background, each of us actually.
There you go.
So that's how we always think of it together internally. We're like, man, how long is this person waiting? Like, is the food getting cold? Like, are we missing like the order, like things like that. So, cool. Well, maybe this is a selfish question, but I feel like anyone following along to this point would be curious. What's next? Say you go down this path, you get yourself out of primary operator, maybe you're still dabbling in different departments. But what's next? I loved a book you recommended. I believe his name was Keith, and I can't remember his last name.
Cunningham.
Cunningham, thank you. The Road Less Stupid, right? I think. And he had 4 hats. And I'd say we're kind of entering into what's next. And then he pegged it after owner as investor. But like, practically speaking, what does the day look like next? Like, what are your priorities next after you're no longer the sole operator or even the head manager, so to speak?
Yeah, great question. So I think, the 4 hats of business that Keith talks about is kind of the artist, the technician, and the owner, operator, and then the advisor,
Right.
or
Thank you. Not
business.
investor. Yes, advisor.
Yeah, it could be an advisor, investor, but really you want to go from, obviously, yeah, kind of the artist, technician, to operator, to owner, then advisor. So those four hats, like after you're done out of the technician role, you've exited out. Now you really want to play that owner role, that CEO, and kind of working on your business rather than in it. And that's actually where most people stay and play for a while, I think.
Mm,
And that's a fun place to be, right? Like you typically have someone that's a manager or someone kind of that's operating the business, and you're kind of checking in and kind of guiding the ship per se. And then kind of the next phase from there is actually finding someone to replace you as like kind of an interim CEO, or someone to just run the company for you and report to you as an advisor. And you're kind of just higher level chess moves at that point. So that's definitely like going from owner to advisor, is definitely a huge step. I think most people like just getting to the owner and really kind of owning the owner role is, um, where most people kind of should shoot for. And then from there, kind of going beyond that is kind of a whole other game. But yeah, I think once you're out of operations, you're kind of, then it's just, really designing and working on your business really is I think the main goal, and that's a really fun place to be.
it's quite beautiful, and not to say for us it's been flawless, like without hiccups, right? Sometimes we regress back into that. Maybe
Yeah.
we didn't build that buffer in certain departments, and someone leaves, and we think, oh, scheiße, So that's I agree with you. That's a really fascinating spot to be in. I'm
Well, that
okay. Please.
yeah, I was just going to add that that's actually the danger of being in that owner role is sometimes you have done such a great job that you get pulled back in to operations, or you break things just so you can have something to do.
Hmm.
So it's
Well,
kind of a funny place to be, to see different people, because it's, you work so hard to get out of the business, and then having nothing to do is just a whole other type of problem. Um,
yeah, you talked
so
about
it's
if you were to sell, having some kind of continuity, something to replace that, just emotionally, even. That's
yeah.
really interesting. Not selling, you stay your owner of your business, and month after month, your role is diminished if you did such a good job. I can see it. It's real, right? And I think other people have talked about this, but it's it's still going to be a new experience for the business owner who just grinded through technician to operator for the last years. And maybe it's resonating well with me because Morgan and I are getting close, and it would almost seem, if we didn't have something else we're trying to launch, our SaaS, that what would we do for work, so to speak? And maybe I'm spitballing too much here or philosophizing too much, but it sounds like you said, you always did service. I came from a blue collar family, and I can remember all my initial jobs. My dad would be like, "That's not real work yet." Like that's so maybe it's like an internal thing in business owners to be like, "I do work." Like you hear it all the time. Oh, maybe my team thinks I don't work. I don't know. Like I think the business owner wants to prove they still can do it, do it. They're an integral part of the success of the company.
Yeah, it's so funny because you work so hard. Like, it's cool. Let's get working from in our business to on it. Then let's work so hard to like, do these code freezes or the laptop test, which we kind of talk about. It's like if you close your laptop, how long could your business last if you did nothing? So you work
Mm.
so hard to arrive at that place, and then when you get there, then it's like this whole other new problem that, it's a good problem to have, but it's very similar to like you're doing nothing and you have to kind of fidget and figure out new things to do or projects. And like in your case, maybe it is great to like, cool, we've gotten to this point, now let's transition into like, maybe my job now is to find cool companies that we can buy,
Maybe,
or
right?
launch new products and build that up, on the team. So I think there's definitely like, you arrive at a point where like needing to do something is definitely important, because if you're not doing something, then you might find yourself back in the business and micromanaging, or trying to fix things that don't need fixing. So there's some interesting things that kind of happen when you kind of get to that point.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds like a dream, and certainly did to me. It sounded like a pipe dream to me a year ago. So, um, I think that sums it up nicely what the ambition here is with productized services. Being that I'm still in the process and learning, I think we all are always arguably, but I'm still kind of amateur hour. Is there anything I should have asked that you would have covered had the tables been flipped and you were leading the conversation? You know, you've done this a couple times and you've advised quite a few of us now.
Yeah, no, I think no, you had some good questions, Ben. I had a couple other downsides, which I think are good to maybe go over. We could cover some of those if you want.
Well, let's leave it on a downer then. Come on, Tyler, pour it on. Just
How
kidding.
about
We'll
I'll
make
I'll
everyone
just
laugh again before it's over. Don't worry.
yeah. Well, no, I think it's good because I think when you're building and working on your productizing whatever service you have,
Keep it real.
a couple of these, yeah, definitely. I think it's not all sunshines and rainbows. And I think the more, especially like that, I mean, that's part of like the thinking time habit of that book you mentioned by Keith. It's like people are really good at seeing the upsides of things and planning for the upsides, but not the downsides.
The thinking time, I
Um,
don't do it now, but when I did, it's almost like meditation. Not
yeah, right.
don't mean to scare anyone off the book. Like, it's a really good book. Check it out, The Road Less Stupid. I mean it in the sense that, as Tyler was saying before I interrupted you, it's these are the questions that are naturally you're resistant to contemplate, because these are the things that you'd rather focus on. What can I do to make things better, which is the point of the questions, but they're attacking it from a what aren't you thinking about to make things better, because there's a lot, it turns out, I don't think about.
Yeah, that definitely. And I guess when I look at some of these downsides, it's not as if like these are not reasons to not venture down the productized
Yeah,
road. It's more of having having the awareness of these downsides going into it so that you can actually protect yourself and build up things to solve these problems. So like one of them that I didn't cover yet was you're gonna have to say no to a lot of people. And I think that's a big one because when you create this productized, packaged, set price, specific person you're serving kind of product and service, um, there's there's inevitably someone who's going to be coming in that doesn't fit into that, or that wants more, or requests something else that doesn't fit inside your new productized offering.
if I
So
could
that's like,
piggyback, like, especially if
yeah,
you've been around, if you had an existing service or
yeah,
set of services, I get to this day people approaching me like thinking they're really being kind and thoughtful, offering me services I used to provide, offering opportunities for services I used to
yeah.
provide. And I have to remind sometimes the same person multiple times. I don't do that. I used to do that, and thank you so much. I don't do that.
Yeah, so that's the hard part for sure. And that's like really hard during the transition phase, like when you launch your productized service and now you're selling just that, but then people are still trying to buy other things from you, and it's really easy to say yes to those
Some
people.
money over
And then
there.
you kind of have this blend of you're doing a productized, but then you also have all this custom work. So that's a hard thing as well. So like you're going to pass through that kind of transition point. Eventually, the goal is to get to just selling your productized service and then just saying completely no to everything. And that's when you really start to see progress. But you feel like you're losing out on a ton of money and opportunity as well. So there's a mental kind of game as well. Like when someone signs up with you and you're just offering one thing, it's sometimes hard to retain like really fast growing customers who want more, right? Because the natural thing is to continue to upsell them, but you might be at a stage where you don't have the next products to upsell them. So they might be going other places for some of those things. Um, the third thing that I would say is also, and this is a big one. Keith touches on this in his book, but productizing, you're really kind of packaging. You're finding people, you're building processes, but sometimes systems can kill creativity.
Yes.
And I think that's a big one to kind of be aware of, because no one wants to be a cog in a machine, and sometimes you're creating essentially a machine in many points. So kind of doing everything you can and trying to protect against that, because it, that's a really quick way to like have a high churn on the creative element of your business. But I think that one's kind of, you can play with that one. And I know Greg, you may have done things there, but I know we did things as well that just kind of, yeah, make things fun, not make it, still allow people to work, have a creative element, even though they're working inside maybe a structure. So there's different ways to kind of approach that as well.
Yeah, it doesn't need to kill positive interpersonal interactions at your company. And even in the work itself, as you said, it doesn't need to stifle creativity. There's just a little more structure, as you put it. I would agree with that perfectly. I mean, in our case, a lot more structure because there wasn't much. So it's been it's been really enabling in the positive sense of the word, really. Yeah,
I love it,
those
man.
downsides, though, I really appreciate it. And I think your second one, that would be like a whole nother podcast we could do sometime, because I find that topic fascinating. And I agree with what you said earlier
Sure.
in our conversation. It's right steps for right time, but it is something to be aware of. Once you go all in on one service, that's all you have for a bit, anyhow.
Yeah, and you want that as well, because that's the whole sprint, the focus, and really building traction in that one offering.
Well, how do you choose
But
well? Well, I mean, are let's say you had a few services. Like, how do you
yeah,
weed those out, and how do you? I mean, let's say you don't
well,
innately just feel it, like that's the one.
yeah, no, I think there's a couple elements to that, because you lean on a good point. Well, one, like, you can look back at all the service offerings you've done, right, and you can see which ones were, did we make the most money, that were the most popular, that had the most demand, provided the most value. And you can kind of pick and choose. Like, that was for us, right? Like, when we had our digital agency and we did all sorts of things, we kind of looked and we're like, okay, as well, like, what do people need on a recurring basis? That was important. And I was like, cool, blog content at the time. That was like, this was a great fit. We have a team of writers. Like, we also offered email writing and website building and funnels and
Right.
all these other things. So we had to just, double down on one thing. And that was the one we chose. So you're not just blindly picking, but if you're just starting out, you might have to test and really do a lot of market research if you don't have kind of the backlog of, benefit of trying a whole bunch of different things leading up into that point.
Yeah. Okay. So if your ambition as a new service provider is to launch a productized service, perhaps the path might seem counterintuitive, but perhaps you need to test a few services first. See where your sweet spot is.
Yeah, and I talk about kind of this. I have this productized focus wheel, and one of them is like picking one product, one avatar, one funnel, one traffic source, but then doing it for like 90-day sprint
That's right. I recall that now.
until you find like your product market fit, right? And
Hmm.
once you find the product market fit, or you might be testing a few products, then you can double down and just like, that's all you do for the next year. But you have to play with it a little bit to kind of find what that is. And that's a tough period. That's like the grind element of the business. That is not easy. So yeah, definitely something to think about.
Definitely. Wow. Thank you, Tyler. A lot to think about. I appreciate you taking the time. I think it's well worth mentioning to people to check out productized.services. We personally have benefited a ton from your time. So I really appreciate it. Month after month, it's been instrumental for us in ways that I didn't think mentorship and community could help us. So I just wanted 45 minutes of your time to share with other people. So thanks a lot.
Man, so much to cover. I appreciate it. And I put together like a little productized playbook, which
Oh,
kind of sums up some of my thoughts and everything, around kind of the idea of productizing. And if anyone wants that, yeah, just on productized.services, there is the free playbook there you can download, which
nice.
should be insightful with a
We
lot
will
of
definitely have a link
ideas.
in the description, and then on our website. So absolutely, they should navigate to that. It's kind of, I'm a marketer. I know what a lead magnet is. I already have your service, but I'm probably going to enter my name in there. So
Hey man, get it. You'll enjoy it. No, it's pretty much a lot of the stuff we've covered, but I've been updating it, and yeah, it's a good little resource.
Really cool. Really cool. Thank you again, Tyler. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the next one.